White woman snatched black CEO's seat, then froze when he said, "I own this airline." "Get out of my seat, now." Vanessa Porter's voice cut through the ambient hum of Skyward Airlines Flight 847. Her manicured fingers tapped impatiently against the leather headrest of Seat 1A, where Michael Collins sat quietly reviewing documents on his tablet. Earlier that morning, Michael had stood in his walk-in closet, deliberately selecting his outfit with purpose rather than habit. His fingers moved past tailored suits and designer shirts, instead pulling out a plain gray hoodie and well-worn jeans. "The test starts with appearance," he murmured to himself, examining his reflection. At 42, Michael Collins had built Skyward Airlines from a struggling regional carrier into one of the country's premier airlines. As founder and CEO with 67% ownership, he could have worn anything or nothing and still commanded respect from his 47,000 employees. But today wasn't about respect earned through position. It was about respect deserved through humanity. His executive assistant had argued against the unannounced quality assessment. "They'll recognize you," she insisted. Michael had smiled. "Most haven't met me in person. Those who have expect tailored suits and security details. They're looking for a position, not a person." Now, as Vanessa Porter's shadow fell across his tablet screen, Michael experienced the first moment of his experiment. He looked up calmly, noting her designer blazer, the diamond tennis bracelet, the handbag that cost more than some employees' monthly salary. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," Michael said evenly. "This is my assigned seat." Vanessa's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched. "There's no misunderstanding. I'm Diamond Elite status. I've been flying Skyward for 12 years. I know exactly which seat is mine." Michael reached for his boarding pass. "I have documentation right here." "I don't need to see your documentation," Vanessa interrupted, her voice rising just enough to attract attention from nearby passengers. "Look, I'm running late for a meeting in New York. I'm not going to argue with you about what's clearly my seat." Her eyes flicked over his hoodie, his jeans, his comfortable walking shoes. Each glance carried judgment, assumptions, crystallizing into certainty. "I think economy is more your speed," she added, voice dripping with condescension. "It's toward the back." Michael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His heart rate quickened despite years of meditation practice. The familiar burn of indignation rose in his chest. Not new, but never easy. He took a measured breath, centering himself, as the memories flashed the high-end stores where security shadowed him, the executive lounges where staff directed him to general waiting areas, the valet stands where attendants assumed he was picking up rather than dropping off. Each time the same calculations. Assert himself and be labeled aggressive. Walk away and surrender his dignity. Document the incident and risk being accused of overreacting. "Ma'am, this is seat 1A. That's what my boarding pass indicates," Michael said, extending the slightly crumpled paper. Vanessa didn't even glance at it. Instead, she placed her hand on Michael's shoulder and pushed, not violently, but with entitled certainty. The coffee in Michael's cup sloshed over the rim, staining his jeans. "This isn't a debate," she said, as she dropped into the seat he'd vacated, arranging herself with the satisfaction of reclaiming rightful territory. "Some people just don't understand how things work." Michael stood in the aisle, feeling the weight of eyes on him. His coffee-stained pants now served as additional evidence against him in the court of first impressions. He calculated his next move carefully. "Is there a problem here?" Daniel Martinez, the lead purser, approached with practiced authority. At 45, the Hispanic crew member carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd managed countless cabin conflicts. His eyes moved quickly between Vanessa, now comfortably seated in 1A, and Michael standing awkwardly in the aisle. "This gentleman seems confused about seating assignments," Vanessa explained before Michael could speak. "I'm in 1A Diamond Elite status, and he was sitting in my seat when I boarded." Daniel turned to Michael with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sir, there appears to be a mix-up. May I see your boarding pass?" Michael handed over the paper. "There's no mix-up. I'm assigned to seat 1A. Daniel glanced at the boarding pass, but his eyes skimmed over it without truly registering the information. The assessment had already been made based on hoodies versus blazers on assumptions versus documentation. "Sir, this is first class. Are you certain you're in the correct cabin?" A teenage girl in row 3 slowly raised her phone, opening the TikTok app and beginning to record. Sofia Rodriguez, 17, had a modest following, mostly for dance videos and outfit transitions. But something in her expression suggested she recognized the unfolding injustice as content of a different kind. "I'm certain," Michael replied, maintaining his calm. "My boarding pass clearly shows seat 1A. 2 more crew members appeared. Amanda Wilson, 32, a blonde flight attendant with a practiced customer service smile, and Jordan Taylor, 25, a junior attendant with eagerness radiating from his freshly pressed uniform. "What's happening?" Amanda asked, positioning herself beside Daniel. "Seat confusion," Daniel explained shortly. "Sir, I understand you believe you're assigned to first class, but there must be an error. Our Diamond Elite members are automatically confirmed in these seats." "I have the same status," Michael said, pointing to his boarding pass. "If you'll just verify." "Sir." Amanda cut in her voice, carrying the artificial patience of someone explaining simple concepts to a child. First-class passengers check in at the priority counter. There would have been a separate boarding process. Are you certain you didn't miss announcements for your actual seating area? Behind them, a 4th crew member appeared. Rachel Goldman, 40 senior flight attendant with cold efficiency in her movements, assessed the situation with narrow eyes. "Problem?" she asked curtly. "Passenger in incorrect seating area," Daniel responded, refusing to relocate. "I'm not refusing anything," Michael clarified. "I'm simply asking someone to verify my assigned seat, which is 1A. Rachel's eyes performed the same dismissive scan the others had executed. Hoodie, jeans, coffee stain, walking shoes. The verdict was immediate and required no documentation. "Sir, first-class boarding concluded 15 minutes ago. If you were truly assigned to this cabin, you would have been identified during priority boarding." "I was on a conference call," Michael explained patiently. "I boarded during general boarding, but that doesn't change my assigned seat." Around them, passengers were now openly watching. Some had phones raised. Sophia's TikTok live stream had already attracted over 200 viewers, her whispered commentary providing context. "They won't even look at his boarding pass properly," she murmured to her audience. "Watch how they keep assuming he's in the wrong place." Vanessa settled deeper into seat 1A, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "I have a connection in New York. I really can't afford delays over such an obvious situation." "Of course, ma'am," Daniel assured her. "We'll resolve this immediately." He turned back to Michael, his voice hardening. "Sir, I need you to proceed to your assigned seat in economy so we can maintain our departure schedule." "This is my assigned seat," Michael repeated, his voice still even, but carrying a new firmness. 1A, it's on my boarding pass, which no one has properly examined." A businessman in seat 2C lowered his newspaper slightly. Ethan Brooks, 43, had been observing the interaction with growing discomfort. "Shouldn't someone actually check his boarding pass?" he suggested. "Seems like a simple way to resolve this." Daniel's posture stiffened. "Sir, we're handling this according to protocol." "What protocol involves ignoring documentation?" Ethan pressed. Amanda stepped forward, her customer service smile tightening. "Sir, please allow us to manage this situation. We're trained to handle these matters." Rachel moved closer to Michael, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "This is becoming disruptive. Either proceed to your actual seat in economy or we'll need to involve airport security." Michael noted each word, each assumption, each denial of his documentation. His phone buzzed in his pocket, likely his executive team wondering why he hadn't checked in for their virtual meeting, The irony wasn't lost on him. "I would welcome security's involvement," Michael said calmly. "Perhaps they'll actually verify my documentation." Daniel exchanged glances with Rachel, a silent communication passing between them. He reached for his radio. "Security to gate A17 main cabin," he said. "Passenger refusing to comply with seating assignment." Vanessa watched with smug satisfaction. Some people just can't accept when they don't belong somewhere. The words hung in the air, their meaning clearer than she perhaps intended. Michael stood perfectly still, his posture neither aggressive nor submissive. Behind him, Sophia's live stream counter ticked upward 500 viewers, 750, 1,000. The first act of Michael's assessment was complete. He had documented exactly what he'd suspected. Appearance trumped documentation assumptions, overrode evidence, and dignity was treated as a privilege rather than a right. Security was coming. The real test was about to begin. "Sir, if you'd just be reasonable, we could avoid escalating this further." Daniel's voice carried forced patience as passengers continued boarding, many slowing to observe the confrontation. Michael remained steady, his expression neutral despite the growing spectacle. "I am being reasonable. I'm simply asking for my assigned seat, which is clearly indicated on my boarding pass." Amanda stepped closer, lowering her voice to a tone that suggested she was doing him a favor. "Look, we understand you might have gotten confused about the cabin classes. Economy Plus is very comfortable too, with extra legroom. Let me help you find your actual seat." "My actual seat is 1A," Michael repeated. Rachel crossed her arms, her assessment complete. "First-class passengers present themselves differently," she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "It's about respecting the premium experience." Michael raised an eyebrow. "How exactly should first-class passengers present themselves?" The question caught Rachel off guard. Her eyes flicked uncertainly to Daniel before she composed herself. "Appropriately," she replied. "Business attire, proper luggage, professional demeanor." Jordan, the junior attendant, nodded eagerly. "It's about standards," he added, glancing at Rachel for approval. "First class has certain expectations." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "And those expectations are based on appearance rather than documentation." Daniel bristled. "Sir, you're mischaracterizing our procedures. This isn't about appearance." "Then what is it about?" Michael asked. "Because my boarding pass clearly indicates seat 1A, yet no one has properly verified it." Around them, the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. Passengers were no longer simply observing, they were taking sides. Some whispered support for the crew, mentioning schedules and protocols. Others murmured concerns about the handling of the situation. Sophia's live stream had now reached over 2,000 viewers, her commentary growing more pointed. "They keep saying it's not about appearance, but watch, they still won't check his ticket properly." Vanessa shifted in seat 1A, irritation flashing across her face. "This is ridiculous. I've never experienced such a delay over something so obvious." Michael's mind drifted momentarily to a memory from 8 years earlier. He'd been in Singapore after delivering a keynote address at an aviation conference. Still wearing the casual clothes he preferred for speaking engagements, jeans and a button-down shirt without a tie, he'd attempted to enter the VIP lounge at Changi Airport. "Excuse me, sir," the attendant had said politely but firmly. "This area is for first-class and elite status passengers only." Michael had presented his credentials, both his boarding pass and his status card. The attendant had examined them with obvious skepticism. "I'll need to verify these," she'd said, disappearing with his documentation for nearly 10 minutes while he stood waiting other passengers flowing past him into the lounge with minimal checks. When she'd returned, her manner had changed completely. "I'm so sorry for the inconvenience, Mr. Collins. Please follow me to our private suite area." The sudden shift in treatment once his status was confirmed had stayed with him. It wasn't respect, it was correction of a mistaken assessment. The experience had planted the seed for what would eventually become today's quality assessment. Now, as Michael stood in the aisle of his own aircraft, he observed a flight attendant approaching with clear purpose. This was Rachel Goldman, returning with what appeared to be a manifest. "Sir," she began, her tone clipped, "I've checked our passenger list. First class is fully booked with our premium passengers. There must be an error with your boarding pass." "May I see the manifest?" Michael asked. Rachel clutched the tablet closer. "That's confidential company information." "Convenient," Michael remarked. Daniel stepped forward again. "Sir, we have a departure schedule to maintain. You need to find your assigned seat in economy now, or we'll be forced to—" "To what?" Michael asked. "Remove me for sitting in my assigned seat, for presenting valid documentation that no one will properly examine." Jordan shifted uncomfortably, glancing between his colleagues. Something about the passenger's calm confidence was beginning to make him uneasy. "I think we should double-check his boarding pass," he suggested quietly to Amanda. Amanda shot him a warning look. "We don't need to check anything. It's obvious he's in the wrong cabin." "What makes it obvious?" Michael asked, catching the exchange. Amanda flushed slightly. "Sir, this discussion is pointless. Your seat is in economy." Just then, a little girl of about 7 peered around her mother's seat, wide-eyed at the commotion. She looked at Michael, then at the crew members surrounding him, clearly confused by the adult dynamics playing out. "Mommy," she stage-whispered loud enough for several rows to hear, "why won't they look at his ticket? My teacher says we should always check our work." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the cabin. The mother hushed her daughter gently, but the child's innocent observation had cut through the pretense with devastating accuracy. Michael caught the little girl's eye and gave her a small wink. She grinned back, pleased to have contributed to the adult conversation. Michael's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen to see a message from his CFO. "Board meeting moved to 4 p.m. Where are you?" Vanessa caught sight of the notification and laughed. "Oh, look, he's got a board meeting text. Probably his shift manager at McDonald's wondering where he is." The comment rippled through the cabin, drawing uncomfortable laughs from some passengers and shocked expressions from others. Sophia's live stream counter jumped as viewers shared the link 3,500 now watching. "That's completely inappropriate," Ethan said from seat 2C, no longer pretending to read his newspaper. "Mind your own business," Vanessa snapped. As the confrontation escalated, Vanessa's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced down to see a message from her colleague. "How's the flight? Ready for the D&I presentation?" For a split second, Vanessa's confident expression faltered. Her company's diversity and inclusion initiative, her initiative, was the reason for her trip to New York. The presentation she'd spent weeks preparing highlighted her commitment to recognizing and challenging unconscious bias in corporate environments. The irony wasn't lost on her, but she quickly suppressed the momentary doubt. This was different. This was about standards, not bias. About protecting what she'd earned. About maintaining order. Heavy footsteps sounded from the jet bridge as 2 airport security officers approached. Officer Diana Rivera, 38, carried herself with professional authority, her Hispanic features set in neutral assessment mode. Beside her, Officer James Patterson, 45, scanned the cabin with practiced efficiency. "What seems to be the problem here?" Officer Rivera asked, addressing the question to Daniel. "We have a passenger refusing to move to his assigned seat," Daniel explained, gesturing toward Michael. "He's insisting he belongs in first class despite obvious indications to the contrary." "What obvious indications?" Officer Patterson asked. The question caught Daniel off guard. "Well, he wasn't part of priority boarding and—" His voice trailed off as he realized how thin the explanation sounded. "May I see your boarding pass, sir?" Officer Rivera asked Michael directly. Michael handed her the paper. Unlike the crew, Officer Rivera actually studied it, her brow furrowing slightly. "This does indicate seat 1A," she confirmed, looking up at Daniel questioningly. "There must be an error in the system," Rachel interjected quickly. Our manifest shows that seat is reserved for a Diamond Elite member. I am a Diamond Elite member, Michael stated. Do you have your membership card? Officer Patterson asked. Michael pulled out his wallet and presented his status card. Officer Patterson examined it, then looked at Michael with new interest. This appears to be in order, he said. Mr. Collins does have Diamond Elite status, and his boarding pass indicates seat 1A. A visible ripple of unease passed through the crew. Vanessa straightened in her seat, confidence wavering slightly. That doesn't make sense, she insisted. I'm Diamond Elite, and this seat was assigned to me. May I see your boarding pass, ma'am? Officer Rivera asked. Vanessa pulled up the digital pass on her phone and displayed it triumphantly. Officer Rivera studied it, then looked back at Michael's paper boarding pass. Ma'am, your boarding pass shows seat 3B, not 1A, Officer Rivera stated. The cabin went silent. Vanessa's face flushed red. That's impossible. I always get assigned to 1A. I'm Diamond Elite Plus. Nevertheless, Officer Rivera continued professionally, your assigned seat is 3B according to your boarding pass. Michael had remained silent throughout this exchange, observing each reaction, each shift in power dynamics. Now he spoke. Officers, thank you for taking the time to actually verify the documentation. It's unfortunate that the crew didn't feel this basic step was necessary. Daniel's face had gone pale. Sir, we were simply following standard procedures for cabin management. What procedure involves refusing to verify seating assignments? Michael asked quietly. The question hung in the air unanswered. Jordan, the junior attendant, looked increasingly uncomfortable. Amanda's professional mask had slipped, revealing uncertainty. Rachel maintained her cold composure, but her posture had stiffened defensively. Ma'am, Officer Patterson addressed Vanessa. You'll need to move to your assigned seat so we can resolve this situation. This is outrageous, Vanessa protested. I've been flying skyward for 12 years. I know which seat is mine. Your boarding pass indicates otherwise, Officer Rivera replied firmly. Vanessa stood abruptly, gathering her designer handbag. I want to speak to a manager. This is completely unacceptable. Michael watched her careful note of her wording, her tone, her assumption that authority would side with her, despite clear evidence to the contrary. It was exactly the pattern he'd observed throughout the Skyward system, a pattern he was now documenting in real time. As Vanessa reluctantly moved toward seat 3B, Michael calmly reclaimed seat 1A. The coffee stain on his jeans had dried to an irregular brown patch, visual evidence of the encounter. Is there anything else you need, sir? Officer Rivera asked. No, thank you, Michael replied. I appreciate your professionalism. The officers nodded and turned to leave, but Daniel stepped forward. Wait, he said, lowering his voice. That seat is reserved for our highest-tier passengers. There's clearly been a mistake. Officer Patterson's expression hardened. The documentation has been verified. The passenger has valid status and a valid boarding pass for seat 1A. Unless you have evidence to the contrary, the matter is resolved. But look at him, Daniel hissed, apparently forgetting how voices carried in the confined cabin space. Does he look like he belongs in first class? The comment rippled through the cabin. Sophia's live stream, now at 7,000 viewers, captured the moment perfectly. Her whispered commentary was scathing. Did he really just say that out loud in 2025? Officer Rivera's eyes narrowed. What exactly should first-class passengers look like, sir? Daniel realized his mistake too late. I didn't mean... That's not what I think we're done here, Officer Patterson said firmly. The passenger is in his assigned seat. The documentation has been verified. As the officers departed, Michael settled back into seat 1A. The confrontation appeared resolved, but the true assessment was just beginning. Daniel, Amanda Jordan, and Rachel huddled near the galley, whispered conference carrying urgency. Around Michael, other first-class passengers watched with varying expressions. some embarrassed, some curious, some quietly furious at the disruption. Ethan from 2C caught Michael's eye and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. "Should never have happened," he said quietly. Michael nodded his thanks but remained focused on his observation. The crew was now implementing damage control, their whispers becoming more animated as they realized the extent of their misstep. Vanessa, now seated in 3B, was on her phone, her angry voice carrying despite her attempts to keep it down. "I've been humiliated. No, they sided with him. Yes, the security officers. I don't understand how this happened."
Michael's phone buzzed again. The board meeting would start without him, but that was part of the plan. Today's assessment was more important than quarterly projections and expansion strategies. Today was about the foundation upon which everything else was built. As the final passengers boarded, Michael noticed something interesting. Both Daniel and Rachel were now on phones of their own, stepped away from the other crew members. Their expressions suggested they were receiving unwelcome news. Michael checked his watch. 5 minutes until scheduled departure. The humiliation phase of his assessment was complete. What came next would depend entirely on how deeply the crew had embedded themselves in their mistaken assumptions. Sophia's live stream counter continued to climb, 12,000 viewers now watching and commenting in real time. The digital audience had grown large enough that hashtags were forming. Skyward shame. First class. While Black hashtag airline audit in seat 1A. Michael Collins waited patiently for the next phase to begin. He had planned for this moment for months. Now it was time to see exactly how his airline responded when confronted with their own failures. The cabin air grew heavier as departure time approached. Daniel Martinez stood at the front of the aircraft, his earlier confidence replaced by visible anxiety. He kept glancing at Michael, then back at his phone, then toward the cockpit. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice slightly strained, "we're experiencing a brief delay in our departure. We should be underway shortly. Thank you for your patience." Amanda approached Michael cautiously, a new deference in her manner. "Sir, can I offer you a pre-departure beverage? Perhaps a replacement for your coffee?" The shift in treatment wasn't lost on Michael or the observing passengers. Something had changed, but most couldn't identify what. "Water would be fine, thank you," Michael replied, maintaining his neutral observation mode. Amanda rushed to fulfill the request with an urgency that seemed disproportionate. Behind her, Rachel was engaged in intense conversation with someone on the aircraft phone, her back turned to the cabin but her rigid posture betraying tension. Michael's phone buzzed again. A text from Patricia Lawrence, his chief legal officer. "Are you still conducting the assessment? The executive team is waiting for updates." He typed a brief reply. "Assessment ongoing. Revelatory phase beginning shortly." As he set his phone down, Michael noticed Jordan hovering nearby, clearly torn between following his superior's example and addressing a growing certainty that something significant was happening. "Sir," Jordan began hesitantly, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry about the confusion earlier." Michael studied the young man. Unlike his colleagues, Jordan seemed genuinely disturbed by what had transpired. "Was it confusion, though?" Michael asked quietly. "Or was it assumption?" Jordan swallowed hard. I should have checked your boarding pass properly." "Yes," Michael agreed simply. "You should have." The cabin door remained open well past the scheduled departure time. Passengers were growing restless, checking watches and phones. Vanessa, still in seat 3B, was becoming increasingly agitated, repeatedly pressing her call button. Finally, Daniel approached Michael again, his manner completely transformed from their earlier interaction. "Mr. Collins," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "there seems to be some confusion about your status with the airline." Michael raised an eyebrow but said nothing, allowing the uncomfortable silence to stretch. "The system is showing some unusual markers on your passenger profile." Daniel continued, clearly fishing for information. Are you perhaps affiliated with Skyward in some capacity? From seat 2C, Ethan watched the interaction with growing interest. He'd worked in corporate environments long enough to recognize a dramatic power shift in progress. Michael checked his watch. We're now 15 minutes past our scheduled departure, Mr. Martinez. Is there a reason we're still at the gate? Daniel's eyes widened at Michael's use of his name, which had not been formally exchanged. There's been a request to verify some information before departure, Daniel said carefully. Requested by whom? Michael asked. I'm not at liberty to. Michael's phone rang, interrupting Daniel's evasion. The screen displayed a name that made Daniel's face drain of color as he caught a glimpse, Skyward Executive Suite. Excuse me, Michael said politely, answering the call. Collins. The voice on the other end belonged to Harold Whitfield, the most senior board member and the one who had most frequently questioned Michael's hands-on management approach. Michael, where the hell are you? The board is waiting and we have major decisions pending on the Chicago expansion. I'm conducting a quality assessment, Harold, Michael replied calmly, his voice clearly audible to those nearby. On Flight 847. A pause. You're on one of our aircraft right now. Yes. In fact, I'm having quite an illuminating experience regarding our customer service protocols. Another pause, longer this time. Are you testing the crew? I'm assessing our entire customer experience, particularly how documentation is verified and how assumptions influence service delivery. Daniel had taken several steps back, his face ashen. Rachel had emerged from her phone conversation, her expression suggesting she'd received unwelcome information. Amanda stood frozen water bottle still in hand. Michael, Harold's voice carried a new edge. Are you telling me you're conducting one of your undercover assessments right now while the board is waiting? The assessment has proven more valuable than anticipated, Michael replied. I'll have a full report prepared for the board by tomorrow morning. The findings are significant. As Michael ended the call, he noticed that Sophia's live stream had now exceeded 25,000 viewers. The cabin had gone eerily quiet as passengers sensed the shifting dynamics without fully understanding their cause. Vanessa, frustrated by being ignored, approached the front cabin. Excuse me, but what exactly is causing this delay? I have a connection to make. Rachel intercepted her before she could reach Michael. Ma'am, please return to your seat. We're addressing a situation. What situation? Vanessa demanded. We should have departed 20 minutes ago. Michael stood, drawing all eyes in the cabin. His posture remained relaxed, but something had subtly changed in his demeanor and quiet authority that hadn't been apparent before. The situation, Ms. Porter, he said calmly, is that Skyward Airlines is currently experiencing a significant failure in its customer service protocols, which I am in the process of documenting. Vanessa blinked in confusion. How do you know my name? Who are you? Michael reached into his pocket and withdrew not a wallet or phone, but a small electronic device that resembled a key fob. He pressed his thumb against it, and the cabin screens throughout the aircraft suddenly activated. On every screen appeared the Skyward Airlines executive dashboard, a system interface that ordinary passengers never saw. At the top, in clear letters, Collins Michael J., Founder, CEO, Authorization Level Maximum. The cabin erupted in gasps and murmurs. Sophia's live stream chat exploded with comments as she panned between Michael and the screens. Daniel Martinez gripped a seat back for support. Amanda dropped the water bottle she'd been holding. Rachel's composed facade cracked completely. You're... Vanessa couldn't finish the sentence. Michael Collins, he confirmed. Founder and CEO of Skyward Airlines, owner of 67% of company shares, and yes, the rightful occupant of Seat 1A. The revelation landed like a thunderclap. Some passengers audibly gasped. Others began furiously typing on phones, spreading the news.
Ethan in 2C actually laughed out loud, a short bark of surprised appreciation. "But you're—" Vanessa gestured helplessly at his hoodie, his jeans, his walking shoes. "Dressed comfortably for a transcontinental flight, yes," Michael agreed. "Which has proven to be quite instructive." He turned to address the entire cabin, his voice carrying natural authority that required no volume to command attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay in our departure. For the past several months, I've been conducting unannounced quality assessments throughout the Skyward system, traveling as a regular passenger to experience our service firsthand." The screens still displayed his executive credentials, irrefutable evidence of his identity. Rachel had backed against the galley wall, her usual composure shattered. Jordan looked simultaneously terrified and fascinated. "Today's assessment has revealed concerning patterns in how we verify documentation, how we make assumptions based on appearance, and how we uphold or fail to uphold the dignity of every passenger." Daniel finally found his voice. "Mr. Collins, sir, I want to assure you that we were simply following what we understood to be proper protocols for judging passengers based on their clothing rather than their documentation." Michael interrupted, his voice still measured but carrying a new edge. "For threatening removal from the aircraft rather than performing the basic step of actually reading a boarding pass, for allowing assumptions about who looks like they belong in first class to override Skyward's documented procedures." Daniel had no response. The cabin remained utterly silent as Michael continued. "Ms. Porter," he addressed Vanessa directly. "Earlier you suggested I try economy because it was more my speed. You physically removed me from my assigned seat. You referred to me in derogatory terms based on assumptions about my status and worth." Vanessa's face had drained of color. "I didn't realize who you were." "And that's precisely the problem," Michael replied. "Dignity isn't earned. It's inherent." He turned back to the crew. "Each of you made a series of decisions this morning. Each decision revealed values and assumptions that directly contradict Skyward's stated mission of equal respect for all passengers." The revelation continued to ripple through the aircraft. Passengers who had initially sided with the crew now looked embarrassed. Those who had been uncomfortable with the situation appeared vindicated. Not everyone in the cabin appeared convinced, however. A middle-aged executive in row 4 frowned deeply, muttering to his seatmate, "This is ridiculous. Now we're all going to be filmed and monitored like criminals because one guy had a bad experience." His companion, a woman in a conservative business suit, nodded in agreement. Companies should focus on running their business, not social experiments. This is what happens when politics enters everything. Their comments, though quiet, were picked up by several nearby passengers, creating small pockets of disagreement throughout the cabin. The diversity of reactions reflected the broader societal tensions around privilege, accountability, and change. The little girl who had asked about checking the ticket peered around her seat again, eyes wide with fascination at the unfolding drama. "Mommy," she whispered loudly, "is that man in trouble because he didn't check the ticket like my teacher says?" Her mother nodded slightly, and the child looked satisfied that the adult world operated on the same principles as her classroom. Sophia's live stream had reached an astonishing 40,000 viewers. Her whispered commentary had evolved from shock to analysis. "This is incredible. He's the actual CEO of the airline, dressed in regular clothes, testing his own staff. And they failed. They completely failed." Michael checked his watch again. "We've now delayed departure by 25 minutes. I suggest we continue this discussion while en route to our destination." He gestured to Daniel. "Mr. Martinez, please inform the captain that we're ready for departure." Daniel moved automatically to comply, the chain of command suddenly crystal clear. As he reached for the intercom, Michael added one final comment that everyone in the cabin heard. "And Mr. Martinez, this assessment is far from over." As the aircraft finally began pushing back from the gate, Michael returned to seat 1A. Around him, the atmosphere had transformed completely. The revelation of his identity had fundamentally altered every dynamic in the cabin.
What no one yet realized as the engines rumbled to life and the aircraft began taxiing was that the most significant consequences were still to come. The seatbelt sign illuminated as Skyward Flight 847 reached cruising altitude. Michael Collins remained in seat 1A, his tablet now displaying a series of documents rather than the executive dashboard that had revealed his identity. Daniel Martinez stood anxiously in the galley, conferring in hushed tones with Rachel Goldman. Their faces betrayed the gravity of their situation career security, evaporating with each passing minute. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice announced over the intercom, "this is Captain Reynolds speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude of 37,000 feet. The weather en route to New York looks clear, and we anticipate an on-time arrival despite our delayed departure. I've been informed that our CEO, Mr. Collins, is on board today. On behalf of the entire flight crew, I want to welcome you, sir." The public acknowledgement drew all eyes to Michael, who nodded politely but remained focused on his tablet. He was methodically documenting each aspect of the morning's events, time-stamped, cross-referenced with Sophia's still ongoing live stream, which had now attracted over 75,000 viewers. Michael's mind wrestled with competing impulses. The evidence was clear. The crew had failed spectacularly, but termination wouldn't necessarily fix the deeper issues. Would making examples of them drive real change or just create fear? He'd built Skyward to be different, yet here was proof of how far they still had to go. Vanessa Porter had not made eye contact with anyone since takeoff. She sat rigidly in seat 3B, her earlier confidence replaced by visible dread. Occasionally, she glanced toward Michael before quickly looking away as though direct observation might accelerate whatever consequences awaited her. After completing his documentation, Michael reached for the cabin phone. Daniel immediately rushed forward. "Mr. Collins, how can I assist you?" "I need to make several calls," Michael replied evenly. "Please ensure they're not interrupted." "Of course, sir. Absolutely." Daniel responded, his former authority now a desperate attempt at accommodation. Michael dialed the first number, activating the speakerphone function. The sound would carry to nearby seats a deliberate choice. This assessment had begun with public humiliation. Its resolution would be equally public. Legal Department, Patricia Lawrence speaking. "Patricia, it's Michael. I'm currently on Skyward Flight 847 conducting an unannounced quality assessment. I need to initiate immediate action on several fronts." Patricia's voice sharpened with professional focus. "What's happened?" "I've documented multiple violations of our customer dignity protocols, federal non-discrimination guidelines, and basic service standards. The incidents were witnessed by approximately 200 passengers and are currently being live-streamed to over 75,000 viewers." As Michael detailed the events, Sophia's live-stream chat exploded with comments, "This is happening live. He's holding them accountable right in front of everyone. Watch the crew's faces. They know they're done." Patricia's voice remained calm but took on a steel edge. Names of involved personnel: Lead Purser, Daniel Martinez; Senior Flight Attendant, Rachel Goldman; Flight Attendants, Amanda Wilson and Jordan Taylor, plus a passenger, Vanessa Porter, who initiated the incident. Witnesses: the entire first-class cabin, multiple economy passengers who observed from the aisle, and, as I mentioned, a live stream with timestamp verification. Additionally, airport security officers Diana Rivera and James Patterson documented the boarding pass verification that the crew had refused to perform. Patricia's keyboard clicked rapidly in the background. "I'm pulling their employment files now. I assume you want immediate action rather than standard review protocols." "Correct. This isn't a borderline case, Patricia. This is exactly the pattern we've been working to identify and address throughout the system." "Understood. I'm preparing documentation for appropriate personnel actions based on severity of involvement." "What about the passenger?" Michael glanced toward Vanessa, who had gone completely still, clearly listening to every word. "The passenger physically forced me from the seat, made derogatory comments about my appearance and presumed status, and actively encouraged the crew's discriminatory actions." I want options prepared for both legal consequences and potential rehabilitation pathways. Working on it now, Patricia confirmed. Anything else from legal at this time? Yes. Contact the Department of Transportation's Office of Civil Rights. We'll be self-reporting these violations as part of our transparency initiative. Also, prepare a comprehensive review of our current non-discrimination training protocols. Today's incident demonstrates they're clearly failing. Will do. I'll have everything ready for your review upon landing. Michael ended the call, aware of the stunned silence that had fallen over the first-class cabin. Daniel stood frozen in the galley, his face ashen. Rachel had retreated to the rear of the cabin, her composure completely abandoned. A passenger in 4B whispered to her companion, "He's not just firing them, he's changing the whole system." Another replied, "About time someone did." The executive who had earlier expressed skepticism now shook his head. "This is corporate suicide. You can't run a business based on emotions." "It's not emotion," countered an older woman across the aisle. "It's accountability." "It's a publicity stunt," the executive retorted. "We'll see how the shareholders like it when costs go up and efficiency goes down." Without pausing, Michael dialed the second number. "Human Resources, Maria Sanchez speaking." "Maria, it's Michael. I'm on Flight 847 conducting an assessment that has revealed serious violations requiring immediate personnel action." Maria's voice was instantly alert. "What level of response are we looking at?" "Varied based on involvement and responsibility level." "I'll need immediate implementation of the following. 4 lead purser, Daniel Martinez termination. Effective upon landing, full documentation of cause forfeiture of separation benefits. Notification to industry certification bodies." Daniel made a choked sound from the galley, his hands gripping the counter to steady himself. Michael felt a twinge of remorse. 8 years of service ended in minutes. But he thought of the countless passengers who'd likely experienced similar treatment without his power to rectify it. The image of Daniel's 2 young daughters flashed in Michael's mind. He'd met them at the company picnic last summer. How would Daniel explain that Daddy lost his job? How would they pay their mortgage on the house they'd bought just last year? The weight of the decision pressed against Michael's conscience. Was this justice or just power exercised differently? "For Senior Flight Attendant Rachel Goldman," Michael continued, pushing through his doubts. "Demotion to standard flight attendant salary reduction of 15% for 2 years. Mandatory completion of our comprehensive retraining program with special emphasis on documentation, verification, and non-discriminatory service standards." Rachel had sunk into an empty jump seat, her face buried in her hands. "For Flight Attendant Amanda Wilson's 6-month suspension without pay, mandatory retraining and psychological evaluation before reinstatement consideration." Amanda, who had been serving drinks to distract herself from the unfolding situation, froze mid-pour. "For Flight Attendant Jordan Taylor, written reprimand, 90-day probation, weekly counseling sessions, and reassignment to our mentorship program under appropriate supervision." Jordan, the youngest crew member who had shown the first hints of doubt about the situation, nodded slightly, acknowledging the relative mercy in his consequences. "Maria, I want these actions processed immediately upon landing. The crew members will be met by HR representatives at the gate. Their company credentials will be handled according to termination, suspension, or probation protocols as appropriate." "It will be done," Maria confirmed. "Personnel will be waiting at the gate with appropriate documentation. What about replacement crew for the return flight?" "Already arranged. Captain Reynolds has been notified to expect a complete crew change in New York." "Understood. Anything else?" "Yes. Effective immediately. I want implementation of our enhanced training program across all customer-facing personnel. Prioritize documentation, verification, elimination of appearance-based assumptions, and proper escalation protocols. Budget allocation of $30 million annually for the first 3 years." "That's a significant increase," Maria noted without judgment. "The cost of discrimination is higher," Michael replied. I'll also need comprehensive revision of our hiring and promotion criteria. Experience and technical skills matter, but demonstrated commitment to equal dignity must become a primary consideration. I'll have a draft implementation plan ready for your review by tomorrow morning. As Michael ended the call, Sophia's live stream comments surged with reactions. This is how you handle discrimination. He's not just punishing them, he's fixing the whole airline. Other companies need to watch and learn. Michael dialed the third number. By now, everyone in the first-class cabin was listening intently, many recording on phones or sending real-time updates to social media. Media Relations, Thomas Bryant speaking. Thomas, it's Michael. We have a significant situation that requires our transparency protocol. Thomas's voice immediately shifted to crisis management mode. What level are we talking about? Level 1. I've personally witnessed and documented discriminatory treatment on Flight 847. The incident involves multiple crew members, has been live-streamed to a significant audience, and clearly violates both our stated values and federal guidelines. I'll activate the crisis team immediately, Thomas responded. What's our approach? Full transparency. No minimization, no corporate speak, no deflection. We acknowledge the failure, detail the specific actions taken in response, and outline our comprehensive plan to prevent recurrence. That's an aggressive approach, Michael. The board might prefer— The board doesn't make this decision, Michael interrupted firmly. Our responsibility is to the truth, not to comfortable narratives. Understood. I'll schedule a press conference for 6:20 p.m. today. Will you be addressing the media personally? Yes. Prepare supporting materials demonstrating our immediate response, personnel actions taken, and structural changes being implemented. Also, monitor social media for the hashtags #SkywardShame and #FirstClassWhileBlack. They're already trending. On it. Anything else? Yes. I want a direct message sent to every Skyward loyalty member by end of day. It should acknowledge today's failure, outline our response, and reaffirm our commitment to treating every passenger with equal dignity regardless of appearance, status, or background. That's approximately 12 million members, Michael. Every single one, Michael confirmed. This isn't a minor incident we can address quietly. This is a fundamental failure that requires fundamental change. As Michael ended the third call, he turned to face the cabin. The passengers had witnessed the systematic, measured response of a CEO addressing not just individual behavior, but organizational failure. Finally, he turned his attention to Vanessa Porter, still frozen in seat 3B. He stood and walked toward her, aware of every eye following his movement. Ms. Porter, he said, his voice neither angry nor vindictive. We need to discuss your situation. Vanessa looked up, her face pale. Mr. Collins, I want to apologize. I had no idea who you were. That's still missing the point, Michael replied. The issue isn't that you disrespected the CEO. The issue is that you believed someone's appearance determined their worth and their right to dignity. Vanessa swallowed hard. What happens now? Michael studied her carefully. That depends on you. You have two options. The cabin was utterly silent as Michael continued. Option 1. You take responsibility for your actions. You make a public apology acknowledging what happened and why it was wrong. You complete 200 hours of community service with civil rights organizations. You undergo professional bias counseling, and you agree to participate in corporate training sessions sharing your experience as a case study in how bias operates and the harm it causes. Vanessa's eyes widened slightly. And option 2. I file formal discrimination charges under Title II of the Civil Rights Act. You face potential civil penalties exceeding $250,000. You receive a lifetime ban from Skyward Airlines and all partner carriers. And I personally contact the CEO of your company, where I believe you chair the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, providing video evidence of today's incident. The irony of her professional position versus her personal behavior wasn't lost on anyone listening. Vanessa seemed to shrink in her seat.
"How do you know where I work?" she asked quietly.
Michael nodded toward Sophia, whose live stream had now exceeded 100,000 viewers. "The internet is remarkably efficient at identifying people. Your LinkedIn profile, including your role as chairwoman of your company's Diversity and Inclusion Committee, was identified within minutes of the live stream beginning." Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had changed in her expression, not just fear of consequences, but the beginning of genuine realization. "I'll take option 1, she said, her voice barely audible. Then with more strength, "Not to avoid consequences, but because I need to understand how I could chair a D&I committee while doing exactly what I claim to fight against." Michael nodded, somewhat surprised by her self-awareness. "Officer Rivera will contact you within 24 hours to formalize the agreement. The terms are non-negotiable, and any failure to comply will automatically trigger option 2. As Michael returned to his seat, the consequences phase of his assessment was complete. He had addressed individual accountability, organizational responsibility, and structural change, all within 40 minutes at 37,000 feet. What remained now was to ensure these consequences translated into lasting transformation, not just for Skyward Airlines, but for an industry that had long permitted dignity to be determined by appearance status and assumptions. The aircraft continued its journey eastward, carrying passengers who had witnessed not just an incident of discrimination, but its systematic dismantling by someone with both the power and the will to effect genuine change. As Skyward Flight 847 began its descent into New York's JFK Airport, the atmosphere in the cabin had transformed. What had begun as a routine morning flight had become a watershed moment that none of the passengers would forget. Michael Collins sat in seat 1A completing a company-wide email on his tablet. The message would reach all 47,000 Skyward employees within minutes of his approval. To all Skyward personnel, effective immediately. Skyward Airlines is implementing our comprehensive dignity protocol across all operations. Today, I personally experienced discriminatory treatment on one of our aircraft when crew members refused to verify my documentation, made assumptions based on my appearance, and threatened removal from my assigned seat. This is not an isolated incident. It represents a pattern we must acknowledge and address at every level of our organization. The Dignity Protocol includes the following immediate changes. Documentation verification is now mandatory for all seating disputes, without exception. Body cameras will be provided to all customer-facing personnel, with footage reviewed whenever complaints arise. Anonymous reporting channels are being established for employees to flag discriminatory practices without fear of retaliation. Comprehensive retraining will begin next week for all customer-facing staff. Hiring and promotion criteria now explicitly include demonstrated commitment to equal dignity for all passengers. Let me be absolutely clear. Skyward exists to connect people with respect and professionalism. When we fail to uphold these values, we fail in our fundamental mission. The changes outlined above are not suggestions. They are requirements with real consequences for non-compliance. I take personal responsibility for the culture that allowed today's incident to occur. I also take personal responsibility for ensuring it never happens again. Michael J. Collins, founder and CEO. Michael approved the message for immediate distribution, then turned his attention to the cabin around him. Daniel Martinez stood near the cockpit door, his posture defeated as he contemplated the end of his 8-year career. Rachel Goldman had retreated to the rear galley, avoiding eye contact with passengers. Amanda Wilson continued serving drinks mechanically, her movements betraying her anxiety. Only Jordan Taylor seemed to be processing the situation as an opportunity for growth rather than a professional catastrophe. As Michael observed Daniel, he found his resolve wavering slightly. The man had a family, a wife, and 2 young daughters he'd often mentioned with pride at company events. Michael had seen photos on Daniel's desk, Elena playing soccer, Sophia in a ballet recital. Now those children would bear the consequences of their father's actions. Was termination truly necessary? Or was it an exercise of power masquerading as justice? The thought troubled him. Termination was clean, decisive, but rehabilitation was messier, more complicated, and perhaps more transformative. Still, some lines couldn't be uncrossed. Daniel's refusal to verify documentation, his explicit statement about who looked like they belonged in first class. These weren't minor oversights, but fundamental failures that revealed deeper biases. Michael sighed inwardly. Sometimes leadership meant making difficult decisions that affected real people with real families. But allowing discriminatory behavior to continue unchecked would harm countless others. Passengers who didn't have the power to hold the system accountable. In this case, the greater good required painful consequences. Sofia Rodriguez had finally ended her live stream after more than 2 hours of continuous broadcasting. The video had been viewed by over 150,000 people in real time and was now being picked up by major news outlets. She looked both exhausted and exhilarated by her unexpected role in documenting the day's events. Vanessa Porter remained in seat 3B, isolated by her own actions and the cabin's collective judgment. Several times she had attempted to approach Michael with further apologies or explanations, but each time she had reconsidered, perhaps recognizing that words alone couldn't undo what had transpired. As the aircraft descended through 10,000 feet, Michael turned to Ethan Brooks in seat 2C. "Thank you for speaking up earlier," he said. "Most people find it easier to remain silent." Ethan shrugged slightly. "It wasn't right. Didn't matter who you were." "That's exactly the point," Michael agreed. "Dignity shouldn't depend on identity or position." The captain's voice came over the intercom announcing their final approach. The New York skyline came into view through the right side windows, sunlight glinting off glass towers. "Mr. Collins." Jordan approached hesitantly. "I understand why the consequences are necessary, but I was wondering, is there a path forward? A way to rebuild after making mistakes like we did today?" Michael studied the young flight attendant thoughtfully. "There's always a path forward, Mr. Taylor. Accountability isn't about punishment, it's about growth. The question is whether you're willing to do the difficult work that growth requires." Jordan nodded, considering this. "I want to be part of the solution." "That begins with understanding the problem," Michael replied. "Not just the actions, but the assumptions behind them. Why did you immediately believe Ms. Porter rather than checking my documentation? What made you assume I didn't belong in first class?" Jordan's face flushed. I followed the lead of the senior crew. I didn't think for myself." "That's part of it," Michael acknowledged. "But there were also assumptions about who belongs where, assumptions we absorb from our surroundings without even realizing it. I want to unlearn those assumptions," Jordan said quietly. "That's why your consequences include mentorship rather than termination," Michael explained. "You showed the capacity to question and reconsider. That's where transformation begins." The aircraft touched down smoothly on runway 22R landing gear, chirping against the asphalt. As they taxied toward the terminal, Michael noticed several skyward corporate vehicles positioned near their arrival gate, the response team already in place. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel announced, his voice steady despite his circumstances. "We've arrived at JFK Terminal 4. Local time is 2:17 p.m. with clear skies and a temperature of 72 degrees. On behalf of the crew, I want to apologize for the situation that occurred on today's flight." The apology came too late to salvage his position, but Michael noted the attempt. Genuine remorse, even after consequences were inevitable, still mattered. As the aircraft reached the gate and the seatbelt sign switched off, passengers began gathering their belongings. Many approached Michael briefly, expressing support or simply nodding acknowledgement of what they had witnessed. Sophia stopped beside seat 1A. Mr. Collins, I just wanted to say, I've never seen anyone handle discrimination that way, with power but without vengeance. Vengeance doesn't create change, Michael replied. It just creates more resentment. Real transformation requires both accountability and opportunity for growth. As the cabin door opened, Maria Sanchez from Human Resources was visible in the jet bridge, accompanied by a team that would handle the various personnel actions. Behind them stood a new flight crew ready to take over for the return journey to Los Angeles. Michael remained seated, allowing other passengers to depart first. He watched as Daniel Martinez was escorted off the aircraft employment terminated after 8 years. Rachel Goldman followed her demotion paperwork already prepared. Amanda Wilson walked off alone, her 6-month suspension beginning immediately. Jordan Taylor was directed to a different member of the HR team, his probation and mentorship program outlined in detail. Vanessa Porter hesitated at the door, then turned back toward Michael. Mr. Collins, she began, her voice unsteady. I want to say something not as an excuse but as a realization. When I saw you in that seat, I didn't consciously think about your race. I thought about your clothes, your casual demeanor. I told myself it was about standards, not identity. Michael listened without interrupting. But now I see that's just a more subtle version of the same prejudice, she continued. I judged your worth based on superficial factors and assumed I was entitled to something you weren't. I'm beginning to understand how wrong that was. That understanding is the first step, Michael replied. What matters now is what you do with it. Vanessa nodded, then departed without further comment. Whether her realization would translate into genuine change remained to be seen, but the opportunity was there if she chose to embrace it. Finally, Michael stood and prepared to disembark. Thomas Bryant from Media Relations waited in the jet bridge, tablet in hand. The press conference is scheduled for 6:00 p.m., Thomas confirmed. We're already receiving media inquiries. The story is spreading rapidly. Good, Michael said. Transparency is essential. We acknowledge the failure, detail the response, and commit to verifiable change. The board is concerned about stock implications, Thomas added. Harold Whitfield has called 3 times asking for a strategy to minimize the impact. Michael shook his head. We're not minimizing anything. This isn't about protecting stock prices, it's about building a company that actually lives its values. Tell Harold I'll address the board after the press conference. As they walked through the terminal, Michael noticed people recognizing him from the already viral video. Some nodded respectfully. Others took discreet photos. News traveled fast in the digital age, perhaps the only advantage when confronting deep-seated patterns of discrimination. Outside the terminal, a skyward corporate vehicle waited to transport Michael to headquarters. As he settled into the back seat, he reflected on the morning's assessment. The results had been even more revelatory than anticipated, exposing not just individual biases, but organizational blind spots that required immediate attention. The real work was just beginning. Personnel changes and policy adjustments were necessary first steps, but lasting transformation would require sustained commitment from leadership, from employees, and from passengers, who now had tangible evidence of both the problem and the solution. As the vehicle pulled away from the terminal, Michael opened his tablet and began drafting the framework for what would become known throughout the industry as the Collins Protocol, a comprehensive approach to ensuring that dignity remained a right rather than a privilege, regardless of appearance, background, or status. The resolution wasn't about punishing individuals. It was about rebuilding a system where such punishment would eventually become unnecessary, because the underlying assumptions had been identified, challenged, and transformed. 1 week after Flight 847, Michael Collins stood at a podium in Skyward Airlines' headquarters, addressing not just media representatives, but an audience of employees, industry leaders, and civil rights advocates. The press conference had evolved into something more significant, a public commitment to structural change. Today, I'm announcing the implementation of the Dignity First initiative across all Skyward operations.
Michael stated, his casual attire, jeans and a button-down shirt, making a deliberate statement. This comprehensive program addresses the root causes of discrimination rather than just its symptoms. Behind him, a large screen displayed the initiative's key components: mandatory documentation verification protocols, body cameras for all customer-facing staff, anonymous reporting systems, revised training programs, and restructured hiring criteria. Last week, I experienced firsthand what many travelers face: daily assumptions based on appearance, refusal to verify documentation, and threats of removal despite having valid tickets. The difference is that I had the power to address these issues immediately. Most passengers don't. Reporters raised hands, questions flying rapid fire. Mr. Collins, won't these changes significantly increase operational costs? The cost of discrimination is higher, Michael replied without hesitation. We've allocated $50 million annually for implementation, but the true investment is in changing our fundamental approach to customer dignity. What about the fired purser report suggest he's considering legal action? Every personnel action was fully documented and justified. Mr. Martinez received due process according to our employment policies. His actions were captured on video and witnessed by hundreds. Is this just damage control after a PR disaster? Michael smiled slightly. If we wanted damage control, we would have issued a generic apology, made vague promises about reviewing our procedures, and hoped everyone forgot about it by next week. Instead, we're making specific, measurable, and permanent changes with real accountability. That's not damage control, that's transformation. And in the days following the press conference, media coverage exploded across platforms. Headlines ranged from supportive to skeptical. Skyward CEO transforms airline after experiencing discrimination firsthand. The Washington Post. Collins Protocol, a model for corporate accountability or overreaction. Wall Street Journal. Viral CEO fires crew implementing sweeping changes after being mistaken for economy passenger. CNN. Skyward's Dignity First initiative raises privacy concerns. Bloomberg. Is Skyward's new body camera policy a solution or an invasion? Business Insider social media remained equally divided. Some praised Michael's decisive action, while others questioned whether the response was proportionate to the offense. Dignity First trended alongside #boycott Skyward and #privacy matters. Technology experts weighed in on the practical challenges of implementing the body camera system. The data storage requirements alone are staggering, noted cybersecurity expert Ayanna Johnson in a widely shared LinkedIn post. We're talking about 15,000 plus customer-facing employees potentially generating hundreds of terabytes of footage weekly. The privacy implications, data retention policies, and security measures needed would rival those of law enforcement agencies. As the press conference concluded, Michael noticed Harold Whitfield standing at the back of the room, arms crossed and expression troubled. The board member had consistently challenged Michael's hands-on approach, arguing for more traditional corporate governance. "You've opened us up to significant liability," Harold said bluntly as Michael approached. "The transparency approach might play well on social media, but it exposes vulnerabilities our competitors will exploit. Or it demonstrates leadership they'll have to follow," Michael countered. "United already announced their own dignity protocols this morning. American and Delta won't be far behind." "The board is concerned about stock impacts," Harold persisted. "We've already seen a 2-point drop since the video went viral." "Check again," Michael suggested. "We're up 3 points since the press conference. The market respects decisive action and authentic leadership." Harold's expression remained skeptical. "This isn't just about one incident, is it? You're using this to implement changes you've wanted for years." "I'm using this to address patterns that have existed for decades," Michael corrected. "The incident on Flight 847 wasn't an anomaly. It was a symptom of deeper issues that exist throughout the aviation industry and beyond." Harold studied Michael carefully. "You know, I built my career in an era when business priorities were straightforward. Maximize shareholder value, period. Your approach challenges everything I was taught about crisis management. The world has changed, Harold. Today's consumers demand authenticity and accountability, not just apologetic press releases. And if this transparency approach backfires, if admitting our failures drives customers away instead of toward us. Michael considered this. That's a risk I'm willing to take. I'd rather lead an honest airline with temporarily lower stock prices than a dishonest one with artificially inflated value. Harold sighed, recognizing the familiar determination in Michael's stance. The implementation costs are substantial. So is my ownership stake, Michael reminded him. 67% gives me considerable latitude in determining company priorities. This is non-negotiable, Harold. 3 days later, the showdown Michael had anticipated finally arrived. An emergency shareholders meeting had been called by a coalition of institutional investors collectively controlling nearly 20% of Skyward's non-Collins shares. The boardroom was tense as Michael entered his casual attire, now a deliberate statement rather than a test. Eleanor Blackwell, representing the largest investment fund, stood as Michael took his seat at the head of the table. "Mr. Collins," she began, her voice clipped with barely contained fury, "your unilateral actions have placed this company in significant jeopardy. The Dignity First initiative will cost upwards of $87 million over the first 3 years, according to our analysts. The body cameras alone represent a $12 million initial outlay plus ongoing data storage costs, estimated at $3.2 million annually." She slid a detailed financial analysis across the table. This doesn't even account for potential litigation costs from former employees or the significant reputational risk of admitting widespread discriminatory practices. Michael studied the document carefully. The numbers were accurate, though the assumptions behind them were questionable. "Your concerns about costs are noted, Ms. Blackwell," he replied calmly. "But your analysis omits several critical factors. First, the cost of losing passengers who experience discrimination. Second, the legal liability of continuing these practices. And third, the competitive advantage of being the industry leader in customer dignity." Eleanor scoffed. "Competitive advantage? You've publicly admitted your company discriminates against passengers." "I've publicly acknowledged a reality that every airline passenger of color already knows," Michael corrected. "The difference is that we're actually addressing it." James Westfield, representing another major investor, leaned forward. "The board should have been consulted before such sweeping changes were implemented." "The board was informed immediately after the incident," Michael replied. "And my authority as majority shareholder to implement operational changes is clearly established in our corporate charter." "This isn't about authority," Eleanor snapped. "It's about responsibility to shareholders. Your social justice crusade is coming at our expense." Michael's expression hardened slightly. "This isn't a social justice crusade, Ms. Blackwell. It's sound business strategy. Discrimination costs this company millions annually in lost customers, employee turnover, and legal settlements that we quietly pay to avoid precisely this kind of public discussion." He opened his tablet and projected a series of internal metrics onto the wall screen, data the shareholders had never seen. "Our analysis shows that passengers who experience discriminatory treatment never fly Skyward again, and they tell an average of 14 others about their experience. That's a multiplicative loss of business that has been invisible in our accounting until now." The room fell silent as the numbers told their own story. The data was comprehensive and irrefutable. "The Dignity First initiative isn't charity," Michael concluded. "It's an investment in our core business. The real question isn't whether we can afford to implement these changes. It's whether we can afford not to." By meeting's end, the shareholder rebellion had been neutralized, though not everyone was convinced. The financial reality had been made clear. Addressing discrimination wasn't just morally right, it was financially sound. As Maria Sanchez approached with a tablet displaying implementation metrics. "The first phase is underway," she reported. "Body cameras have been distributed to hub personnel, documentation, verification, training has been scheduled, and the anonymous reporting system goes live tomorrow."
What about resistance? Michael asked. Where are we seeing pushback? Primarily from longer-tenured staff who see the changes as an indictment of past practices. There's also concern from the union about the body camera's privacy issues and fear of micromanagement. That's understandable, Michael acknowledged. The technical challenges are substantial. What are our IT people saying? They're struggling with the infrastructure requirements, Maria admitted. Our current data centers weren't designed for this volume of video storage. We're looking at either a major expansion or cloud-based solutions, both with significant cost implications. Then there's the question of data retention periods, access controls, encryption standards. Bring in outside expertise if needed, Michael decided. This has to be done right. If we're asking staff to wear cameras, we need absolute clarity on how that footage will be stored, who can access it, and how long it's retained. There's also the issue of passenger privacy, Maria added. We're filming interactions that include other customers. The legal team is drafting notices and consent protocols, but it's complicated. Michael nodded thoughtfully. Schedule a meeting with union representatives. This isn't about surveillance, it's about protection both for passengers and for staff who follow proper procedures. But we need to address these concerns directly. There's something else, Maria added. Amanda Wilson has requested a meeting. She's been researching bias training programs during her suspension and wants to propose a peer education model. Interesting, Michael remarked. Schedule it for next week. If she's genuinely embracing growth, that's exactly what we want to encourage. Across town, Daniel Martinez sat in his apartment surrounded by job search websites and industry publications. His 8-year career with Skyward had ended in public disgrace, his termination for discriminatory practices now common knowledge throughout the aviation industry. He stared at the framed photo on his desk, receiving his Purser of the Year award just 18 months ago. How had he gone from that to this? Had he always carried these biases, or had they developed gradually through thousands of interactions where appearances became shortcuts for assessment? A soft knock on the apartment door interrupted his thoughts. His wife, Maria, entered their 2 daughters. Elena, 8, and Sophia, 6, trailing behind her. "Daddy, are you still looking for a new job?" Elena asked, climbing onto his lap. Daniel hugged her close, the weight of his situation pressing down. "Yes, mija, I'm trying." "My teacher says everyone makes mistakes," Sophia announced with the confidence of a 6-year-old. "She says what matters is what we learn." Daniel looked at his daughter, then at his wife, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. "Your teacher is very wise," he said finally. "I made a big mistake. Now I have to learn from it." Maria squeezed his shoulder. "The regional airline called back. They want you to interview tomorrow." "Half the salary," Daniel sighed, "and twice the commute." "It's a start," Maria replied simply. "And maybe this happened for a reason." Daniel nodded slowly. His phone rang the 5th call that day from a reporter seeking comment. He ignored it, focusing instead on an email from the small regional airline confirming his interview. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. More importantly, it was an opportunity to rebuild with the hard-earned wisdom of someone who had learned the cost of unexamined assumptions. Meanwhile, in a corporate training facility downtown, Vanessa Porter sat uncomfortably in a circle with 15 other executives, all participating in intensive bias recognition training. As part of her agreement with Michael Collins, she was required to complete both education and service components. "Ms. Porter," the facilitator addressed her, "would you share your experience with the group?" Vanessa swallowed hard. This was the most difficult part, publicly acknowledging what she had done and the thinking behind it. "I judged someone's worth based on appearance," she began hesitantly. "I assumed that because he was dressed casually, he didn't belong in first class. I physically removed him from his seat and spoke to him condescendingly." "And what did you learn from that experience?" the facilitator prompted. "That I was carrying assumptions I didn't even recognize," Vanessa admitted. I thought I valued diversity. I literally chair my company's inclusion committee, but when it actually mattered, my actions showed a different truth. The other executives shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing elements of themselves in her story. The hardest part, Vanessa continued, is acknowledging that this wasn't a momentary lapse. It was a revelation of beliefs I'd been carrying all along but had never been forced to confront. Later that evening, Vanessa called her closest friend, tears streaming down her face. "I don't even recognize myself in that video," she confessed. "I've built my entire professional identity around promoting inclusion, but in that moment I became everything I claim to fight against." "People make mistakes," her friend offered. "No," Vanessa replied firmly. "This wasn't a mistake. It was a revealing. The real question is who I choose to be now that I can't pretend anymore." 3 days later, Sofia Rodriguez sat in a campus coffee shop, still processing her unexpected role in documenting the Flight 847 incident. Her live stream had now been viewed over 3 million times, and she had received interview requests from major networks and publications. "I didn't set out to become an activist," she explained to the campus newspaper reporter interviewing her. "I just saw something wrong and decided to document it. That's the power we all have now, the ability to make invisible patterns visible." "Has the experience changed how you see air travel?" the reporter asked. "It's changed how I see everything," Sophia replied. "I'm more aware of patterns of assumption and exclusion in all spaces, who gets questioned, who gets served first, who gets the benefit of the doubt. Once you start noticing these patterns, you can't stop seeing them." As implementation of the Dignity First initiative continued, challenges emerged. Some staff resisted the body cameras, seeing them as an invasion of privacy rather than a tool for accountability. Others found the enhanced documentation requirements cumbersome during peak travel periods. Michael addressed these concerns directly in a company-wide virtual town hall. "Change is always uncomfortable," he acknowledged. "It requires us to examine established patterns and adopt new practices, but discomfort is not the same as harm. What causes real harm is continuing patterns that deny dignity to passengers based on appearance or assumptions." He displayed a graph showing customer complaints before and after implementation began a sharp decline in reports of discriminatory treatment already visible. "This isn't just about avoiding negative incidents," Michael emphasized. "It's about creating a fundamentally different experience where every passenger is treated with equal dignity, regardless of appearance status or background." Not everyone embraced the changes. 2 vice presidents resigned rather than implement the new protocols. Several shareholders filed a lawsuit claiming Michael's reckless transparency had damaged company value. Aviation industry publications published opinion pieces criticizing the approach as overcorrection and pandering. Michael weathered these challenges with the same calm determination he'd shown on Flight 847. The criticism was expected. Real change never came without resistance. What mattered was maintaining course despite the headwinds. In New York, Amanda Wilson used her suspension period to develop a comprehensive peer education program. Having experienced the consequences of biased assumptions firsthand, she now channeled that experience into creating meaningful change. "The most powerful teacher is someone who's made the mistake themselves," she explained to Michael during their meeting. "I'm not proud of my actions on Flight 847, but I can use that experience to help others recognize and address their own unconscious assumptions." Michael reviewed her proposal thoughtfully. "This has potential, especially coming from someone who's experienced both sides of the equation. Develop it further during your suspension period, and we'll consider implementation when you return." The transformation extended beyond Skyward's internal operations. Other airlines rapidly announced their own dignity initiatives, recognizing that consumers were increasingly demanding accountability. Transportation regulators began reviewing industry-wide standards for passenger treatment. Civil rights organizations offered expertise and monitoring. 6 weeks after Flight 847, Michael boarded another skyward flight, again dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie, again without announcement or entourage. This time, however, the experience was markedly different. The gate agent verified his boarding pass, carefully checking both the seat assignment and his identification. The flight attendant welcomed him aboard with the same professionalism extended to all passengers. His documentation was confirmed twice when a seating question arose with another passenger. The procedures were being followed not because the CEO might be on board, but because equal dignity had become the standard rather than the exception. As Michael observed the transformed operations, he recognized that the work was far from complete. Cultural change didn't happen through policy announcements or press conferences. It happened through consistent practice, through accountability mechanisms, and through a willingness to acknowledge and address continuing challenges. The true measure of transformation wouldn't be visible in a single flight or a quarterly report. It would emerge over time as patterns shifted and new standards became embedded in daily operations. The commitment wasn't to perfection, but to persistent improvement, creating systems where dignity wasn't dependent on appearance, status, or assumptions, but was instead the foundation upon which everything else was built. 6 months after the flight, 847 incident, Michael Collins stood at the rear of Skyward's training center, observing without announcing his presence. At the podium, Amanda Wilson, now reinstated following her suspension, addressed a class of new flight attendants. "Dignity isn't about who the passenger is," she explained, her voice carrying the authority of hard-earned wisdom. "It's about who we choose to be as professionals. Documentation matters. Verification matters. Equal treatment matters." The trainees listened attentively as Amanda shared her experience from Flight 847, not as a distant case study, but as a personal failure she had transformed into a teaching tool. "I looked at Mr. Collins and saw only his clothing, his jeans, his hoodie. I didn't see his humanity. I didn't verify his documentation. I made assumptions that reflected biases I didn't even recognize I carried." She displayed the now famous image captured from Sophia's live stream, Michael standing in the aisle while Vanessa occupied his seat, crew members clustered around with expressions of judgment rather than service. "This moment cost me 6 months of my career," Amanda acknowledged. "But it taught me lessons I might never have learned otherwise. The question isn't whether we carry biases, we all do. The question is whether we're willing to recognize and address them." Michael slipped out before being noticed satisfied with what he'd observed. Amanda's transformation from participant in discrimination to advocate for change represented exactly the kind of growth the Dignity First initiative was designed to foster. Across town, Daniel Martinez interviewed for a mid-level position with a corporate aviation service. His termination from Skyward had become well known throughout the industry, but his subsequent actions had created a different narrative. "Yes, I was fired for discriminatory actions," he acknowledged directly when the interviewer raised the issue. "I failed to verify documentation and made assumptions based on appearance. It cost me my career at Skyward, and rightfully so." "What have you learned from that experience?" the interviewer asked. "That dignity isn't negotiable," Daniel replied, echoing Michael's words from the press conference. "That verification matters more than assumption, and that accountability, while painful, is necessary for growth." He placed a small portfolio on the desk. "These are the bias recognition certification programs I've completed since my termination. This is the victim impact statement I've delivered at industry conferences. And this is the procedural reform proposal I've developed based on the lessons from Flight 847. The interviewer studied the materials with growing interest. Daniel Martinez had transformed his failure into expertise, not excusing his past actions, but using them as the foundation for genuine change. Later that evening, Daniel sat at his kitchen table helping Elena with her homework, while Sophia colored nearby. The apartment was smaller than their previous home. They'd had to downsize after his termination, but there was a warmth here that transcended square footage. "Daddy," Elena asked, looking up from her math problems. Are you still sad about your old job? Daniel considered the question carefully. I'm sad about what I did, he answered honestly. But I'm not sad about what I'm learning. Maria looked up from her laptop where she'd been working on her online degree, something she'd started after they'd realized they needed 2 incomes. Tell them about the job offer, she prompted with a small smile. I got a new position today, Daniel told his daughters. Not flying on planes, but teaching people who do. I'll be helping train flight crews on something called dignity verification protocols. Is that important? Sophia asked, still focused on her coloring. Very important, Daniel replied. It's about making sure everyone is treated with respect no matter what they look like or what they're wearing. Like how my teacher says we have to be nice to everyone, even if they're different, Elena asked. Daniel nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Exactly like that. In Chicago, Vanessa Porter had completed her required community service hours at the Civil Rights Education Center. What had begun as an obligation had evolved into commitment, as she recognized patterns of privilege and exclusion she'd previously been unwilling to acknowledge. The most valuable outcome, she explained to her therapy group, wasn't avoiding legal consequences. It was confronting the person I had been without even realizing it. I chaired a diversity committee while carrying biases that directly contradicted everything I claimed to stand for. She displayed a journal documenting her daily recognition of previously unconscious assumptions. This isn't about punishment or public shame. It's about growth, uncomfortable, necessary growth. The Dignity First initiative had expanded beyond Skyward's original implementation. Transportation regulators had adopted key elements as industry standards. Other service sectors, hotels, restaurants, retail, had developed similar protocols. The hashtag #DignityFirst had evolved from a corporate initiative into a broader movement. Skyward's quarterly earnings had reflected the impact. Customer satisfaction scores reached record highs, employee retention improved, and the stock price stabilized well above pre-incident levels. What Harold Whitfield and other board members had feared would damage the company had instead strengthened it, demonstrating that ethical leadership and business success weren't opposing forces. Michael's approach to transformation had been featured in business publications and case studies. The Collins Protocol, as it became known, provided a framework for addressing structural patterns of discrimination through both accountability and opportunity for growth. 1 year after Flight 847, Michael boarded another Skyward flight. As always, he dressed casually, the hoodie and jeans that had triggered such dramatic assumptions now serving as a quiet reminder of lessons learned. As he waited in the boarding area, he noticed a young black woman in casual attire approach the gate. She wore jeans, sneakers, and a university sweatshirt, nothing that screamed first-class passenger by conventional assumptions. Michael watched carefully as she presented her boarding pass. The gate agent smiled warmly, verified her documentation without hesitation, and motioned her toward the priority boarding lane. First-class passengers may now begin boarding, the agent announced, and the young woman stepped forward confidently. No questions asked, no sideways glances, no assumptions about whether she belonged. She couldn't have been more than 22, perhaps a student using miles for an upgrade or splurging on a special occasion flight. It didn't matter. What mattered was that her documentation, not her appearance, determined her treatment. As Michael boarded behind her, he noticed her settle into seat 2A, directly across from where he would sit. She arranged her belongings without the defensive posture so many adopt when they expect to be challenged. The flight attendant offered her a pre-departure beverage with the same professionalism extended to the businessman in a suit behind her. "First time in first class?" Michael asked conversationally as he took his seat. She smiled. "Yes, using miles. I've been saving since freshman year." "Special occasion." "Job interview in New York, tech company." She looked around the cabin appreciatively. "This is nice." "It is," Michael agreed. "Do you fly first class often?" she asked. Michael smiled. "Whenever I can. I'm Michael, by the way." "Zoe," she replied, extending her hand. They chatted briefly about her interview, her studies in computer science, her hopes for the position in New York. Not once did she give any indication that she recognized him as the CEO whose viral moment had transformed the airline. To her, he was just another passenger, exactly as it should be. As the flight took off, Michael watched the Los Angeles landscape recede below them. The most profound change hadn't been in procedures or protocols, but in experiences. The thousands of daily interactions where dignity was no longer earned through status or appearance, but freely given as the birthright it always should have been. The work would never be truly complete. Transformation wasn't a destination, but a continuing journey. But watching Zoe enjoy her first-class experience without a single moment of doubt or challenge, Michael knew that journey was well underway. And that was worth everything. If you were moved by this story of dignity, respect, and positive change, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. By sharing these powerful narratives, you help spread awareness about how we can all contribute to creating more equitable environments. Leave a comment below with your own experiences or thoughts on how small actions can lead to meaningful transformation. Together, we can make a difference one interaction at a time. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss our next inspiring story.